My fiancée hit me with an ultimatum: either go into debt to give her the lifestyle she wanted, or lose her completely. I picked myself. I watched her dream of a fairy tale wedding crumble before she even got close to the aisle. We weren't wealthy growing up, but we got by just fine. My dad owned a small auto repair shop, and my mom worked part-time at a diner in town, all while managing us kids like a pro. They were honest, hard-working folks, old-school types who believed in doing things the right way. Dad always said, "Don't spend money you don't actually have, and only borrow when you've got no other choice." Mom backed that up with the same kind of thinking. If we didn't have the cash for something, then we just did without. No complaints, no shortcuts, just good old-fashioned grit and patience. That kind of mindset rubbed off on me early. I landed my first job mowing lawns for neighbors during summer breaks. While most kids my age blew their money on the latest video games, I tucked mine away. By the time I finished high school, I had saved a few $1,000s. At 19, that felt like hitting the jackpot. College was never some big flashy dream for me. I ended up going to a state university not far from home, working part-time at a hardware store to help cover my bills. I studied information technology, not exactly glamorous, but it did the trick. After I graduated, I got hired as a network technician. It wasn't the kind of career that turned heads, but it paid the bills and gave me peace of mind. I didn't dread Monday mornings, and that felt like a win. By the time I was 32, I was living the kind of life I had always pictured for myself. I had a modest apartment, a reliable old pickup truck that still ran great, and a savings account I was proud of. Flashy stuff just wasn't my thing. I shopped smart clearance racks for clothes, home-cooked meals most nights, and I didn't waste time or money trying to keep up with whatever was trendy. My life was simple, and I genuinely liked it that way. I'll be honest, my dating life never really took off. I had a few relationships here and there, but nothing ever stuck. Most of the women I met wanted the city life, or had expensive tastes I couldn't and didn't want to keep up with. And that was okay. I figured when the right woman came along, she'd appreciate the simple things, same as I did. That's when Casey showed up. I met her at a small get-together my buddy Eric threw after moving into his new place. I wasn't looking to impress anyone that day, just wore jeans and a flannel, brought a six-pack of soda, and figured I'd relax with some old friends. Then Casey walked in like she owned the room. She wore this flowy dress and had on these sunglasses that probably cost more than my truck. She carried herself like someone used to being noticed. My first thought? No way she'd be into a guy like me. But, surprisingly, we ended up talking. She turned out to be Eric's girlfriend's coworker, in town from the city. I honestly couldn't tell you how our conversation even started, but I do remember how easy it felt to talk to her. She wasn't as intimidating as she seemed at first. She laughed at my dumb jokes and told me she liked how relaxed I was. Over the next few weeks, we kept the conversation going. Casey felt different from anyone I'd dated before. She talked about how exhausting the city was and said she loved the down-to-earth vibe of my small town. She told me she respected how I didn't try to show off and how clear I seemed about what I wanted in life. And for a while, I really believed her. She started coming to visit more often. She loved those slow mornings where we'd sip coffee on my porch, and she never complained about my modest little apartment. She even came fishing with me now and then, not that she was any good at it. She'd laugh when she messed up the line or dropped the bait, and I'd think, man, she really gets me. We dated for 3 years, and during that time, I honestly thought things were going great. Of course, Casey had her quirks. She'd sometimes gripe about how dull the town was or mention how much she missed her favorite sushi spot back in the city. But she'd always follow it up with something sweet, like, "But being here with you makes it worth it." Looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs. Like how she'd joke about me upgrading my truck. She'd laugh and say something like, "Can you picture us rolling up to a nice place in this thing?" I chalked it up to her sense of humor. Now I'm not so sure. It might have been her way of hinting at what she really wanted. She'd also casually drop stories about the designer clothes her parents used to buy her, or how she'd vacation in fancy places as a kid. At the time, I didn't read too much into it. I figured that was just her background. It didn't mean she cared that much about money. But now that I think about it, every time Casey showed support or acted like she was content with my lifestyle, there were little cracks that showed something else underneath. Like when she insisted we celebrate our 1-year anniversary at the fanciest restaurant in town, even though she knew I was trying to save for a house. Or the time I bought her a decent watch. Off-brand, sure, but thoughtful, and she smiled while rolling her eyes, even though she claimed she loved it. Still, I brushed all that off. I told myself we balanced each other out. Me being the grounded one, her bringing the spark. I figured that's how relationships worked. You meet in the middle, right? When I decided to pop the question, I wanted the whole thing to reflect who we were, or at least, who I thought we were. I spent weeks hunting for just the right ring. I skipped the big-name jewelry stores and instead found a small local place that specialized in custom pieces. I chose a simple yet beautiful gold band with a striking little sapphire in the center. It wasn't flashy or oversized, but it felt personal, something that I thought suited Casey to a T. It was elegant but low-key. For the proposal itself, I kept it true to what I believed Casey would want. Nothing extravagant. I took her out to the lake where we'd gone fishing back on one of our first dates. It was a peaceful afternoon, the kind where the sun's just right and the water's calm. We sat together on the dock, feet dangling over the edge, and I pulled out the ring. I said a few words straight from the heart and asked her to marry me. I truly believed I had nailed it. The whole moment felt just right. Quiet, sincere, full of love. Casey had always told me she appreciated how I didn't feel the need to overdo things. So when she teared up and threw her arms around me like she never wanted to let go, saying yes with all the emotion in the world, I felt like the luckiest guy around. At first, she was absolutely glowing over the ring. She kept holding her hand up to the light, admiring it, turning it this way and that. "It's perfect," she kept repeating, smiling ear to ear. She said, "Nobody else has anything like this. You really understand me." That first week after the proposal felt like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. Casey was telling all her friends how thoughtful I was and how much the ring meant to her. I'd catch her snapping photos of it and sharing them with her girlfriends, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. She'd wrap her arms around me out of the blue and whisper things like, "You're amazing, you know that?" It made me feel like I'd done everything right. But after a while, little things started making me pause. She showed the ring off to her coworkers, her close friends, even her yoga instructor, but not to her family. It stood out when we had dinner at her parents' house 2 weeks after the proposal. I assumed she'd be just as eager to show them the ring, but oddly, she didn't even bring it up. Her mom eventually asked, "So, let's see this ring," and Casey kind of froze. Her hand went straight to her lap. "Oh, it's not really, she mumbled, then finally held it up with a stiff smile. Her mom leaned in, gave it a look, tilting her head. It's nice. Very different." "Yeah," Casey said quickly, sliding her hand back down. "It's unique, definitely not the usual diamond thing." Her dad didn't even glance up from his steak, and her mom gave me a polite, tight-lipped smile. "Well, if you're both happy, that's what matters," she said. Casey stayed quiet after that. The car ride home was pretty silent too. I asked if everything was okay, and she brushed it off. "It's just my mom. She's always awkward about stuff like that." I let it go, but the whole exchange stuck with me. Why did it seem like she was embarrassed by the ring? Then there was the wedding venue I suggested. I thought the community center in town would be perfect, charming, affordable, with lots of character. It had beautiful exposed beams, huge windows, and a cozy feel. It wasn't extravagant, but it had heart. I brought Casey to check it out one weekend. I was excited, pointing out the natural light, the warm wood, the space for dancing and dinner. She walked around politely, nodded at everything I showed her, but I could tell something was off. "What do you think?" I asked, trying to read her face. She paused, then said, "It's nice," but there was a hesitation in her voice that gave her away. "Just nice." I laughed, trying to keep it light. She gave a small shrug. "I mean, yeah, it's okay. It's just not really what I pictured. But if this is what works, then it's fine." That one stung a little. I'd been so sure this place matched who we were, or at least, who I thought we were. Her reaction made me doubt myself. Still, I figured maybe it was just nerves or the stress of planning. I told myself she'd come around once we got into the details. Casey had always said she appreciated how I kept things real and grounded. That's part of what she said drew her to me. But those little cracks kept showing. One night, we were hanging out with some of her friends when one of them asked to see the ring. Casey held out her hand, and her friend lit up. "Oh my God, this is so you." Casey smiled, but it wasn't the same bright smile I'd seen before. "Yeah, he really thought it through," she said, voice a little flat, like she was trying to sound excited but couldn't quite manage it. It hit me right then, she wasn't just acting off, she was performing. It was like she was putting on a show for me, for her friends, for whoever was around. Still, I tried to shake the feeling. Maybe I was just reading into things too much. Planning a wedding is stressful. Maybe that's all it was. But as time passed, those little moments added up. Casey would gush about the proposal and the ring to certain people, but with others, she downplayed everything, like she was adjusting the story to fit whoever was listening. One night, I overheard Casey talking to her sister on the phone. I wasn't trying to snoop, but I happened to catch pieces of what she was saying. Her voice was low, kind of unsure. "Yeah, it's different," she said. "Not really what I pictured, but I mean, it's fine. He really put in the effort, and that's what counts, right?" That hit me like a gut punch. I had thought she genuinely loved the ring and what it stood for, the thought behind it, the way I tried to make it personal. But hearing her sound that uncertain made me start questioning if she had just been acting thrilled for my sake. At the time, I didn't quite know what to think. I told myself she was probably just under pressure from her family or maybe feeling overwhelmed by expectations. But deep down, a small voice kept asking, what if Casey wasn't being totally honest about how she felt? The thing is, she never directly criticized anything. She didn't come out and ask for a new ring or insist on booking some extravagant venue. But there was this quiet, unspoken disappointment I couldn't ignore. I could see it in how she paused when people asked about her ring, or how she walked around the community center like she was forcing herself to pretend it was enough. She dodged my questions about what she really wanted with vague answers or shrugs. I chalked it up to wedding stress. Planning everything can make anyone a little tense, and she'd always said she admired my simple, grounded lifestyle. I figured we'd work through the rough patches and meet in the middle. But looking back, maybe those small moments were the early cracks, little signs that her heart wasn't entirely in it. Like her real feelings were slipping through, even if she wasn't ready to say them out loud. Then, slowly but surely, things started to shift. It began with the guest list. I had always imagined something small and personal, maybe around 50 guests, just close friends and family. Both of our families are on the larger side, but I figured we could find a way to trim it down together. When I brought it up, she agreed immediately. "Yeah, that sounds perfect," she said. "We don't need a giant crowd. It's about us, not everyone else." I felt relieved, finally, something we were on the same page about. But a week later, she handed me a rough draft of the guest list, and my eyes nearly popped out of my head. It had over 150 names. "What is this?" I asked, holding the list up like it had betrayed me. "This is just the starting list," Casey said with a smile, like it was no big deal. "Casey, this is 3 times what we agreed on." She shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. I couldn't leave anyone off. My parents have a ton of friends, and they'd be hurt if we didn't invite them. Plus, I've got coworkers, friends from college. "Do you even talk to half these people?" I asked. "Not all the time," she admitted, "but it'd be rude not to include them. Besides, the more guests, the more gifts, right?" She chuckled like it was a joke, but I wasn't laughing. "Gifts aren't the point," I said. "We can't afford a wedding for 150 people." She waved it off like I was overthinking. "Not everyone will show up anyway. We'll figure it out." That became her go-to line for everything. "We'll figure it out." I let it go, thinking we'd revisit the list and trim it back later. But in the pit of my stomach, it started to feel like I wasn't really part of the planning anymore, like the wedding was slipping out of my hands. Then came the venue issue. After her lukewarm reaction to the community center, Casey started showing me photos of places straight out of a bridal magazine, vineyards with rows of blooming flowers, chandeliers and rustic ballrooms. Even a luxury hotel with a rooftop overlooking the city skyline. "These are just ideas," she said, flipping through pictures on her phone. "They're gorgeous," I said honestly. "But they're way out of our price range." "I know," she sighed. "But don't you think it would be incredible to get married somewhere like this? It's our wedding. It should feel special." "It will be special," I told her. "It's about the two of us, not the backdrop." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, I just want it to be unforgettable, that's all." She dropped it that night, but I could tell the thought had taken root. Over the next few weeks, her vision for the wedding just kept getting bigger. First it was the guest list, then the venue, and soon enough, we were talking about catering. "How about a buffet?" I suggested. "It's affordable and people can choose what they want." Casey scrunched her nose. "Buffets feel so casual. Don't you think a plated dinner would be more elegant?" "Sure, if we had an unlimited budget," I said. "But serving steak or salmon to 150 people is going to cost us a fortune." "We don't have to go crazy," she said. "Just a couple of courses." "Casey, do you know how much even that would run us?" She gave the same answer she always did. "We'll figure it out." It was the same with the entertainment. I thought a local DJ would be perfect, someone who could spin a mix of our favorite songs and keep things fun. But Casey was set on hiring a live band. A DJ is fine for, like, a birthday party, she said. But this is a wedding. A live band would make it feel so much classier. You know how pricey bands are? I asked. She let out a long sigh. It's just a thought, she'd say. Not saying we have to do it, but wouldn't it be nice? That became a pattern. Every conversation started with Casey tossing out some grand idea, and me being the one to bring it back down to reality. She always claimed she understood where I was coming from, but I could see the disappointment creeping in. She never spelled it out, but it showed in the way her smile would fade slightly or how she'd suddenly steer the conversation in a different direction. Then came the moment that really shifted things. Casey brought up hiring a wedding planner. We could use the help, she said one night over dinner. Might take some pressure off. I looked up from my plate. Casey, wedding planners aren't cheap. But they end up saving money overall, she argued. They know the vendors, they negotiate deals, that kind of stuff. I think we can manage on our own, I said. It's not like we're planning the royal wedding here. She gave me this look, somewhere between tired and distant. I don't want to get overwhelmed, she said softly. And that got to me. I started wondering if I was being too stubborn. I knew her job was demanding, and she genuinely wanted the day to feel special. But this special she had in mind was starting to look a whole lot different from the vision we used to talk about. And then came the moment that really knocked the wind out of me. One evening, I walked past her on the couch and saw her scrolling through images of engagement rings. Just teasing, I leaned over and said, looking for ideas for someone else? She jumped a bit and quickly locked her screen, laughing nervously. No, just browsing. For what? I asked, genuinely puzzled. Nothing, she said quickly, brushing it off. I didn't want to pry, but something about the whole thing felt off. Later that night, after she went into the bathroom, I caved and peeked at her phone. The search history was full of things like diamond engagement rings and how to upgrade your ring. That hit hard. I had spent months working and saving for her ring, had gone out of my way to find something unique, personal. She told me how much she adored it, said it was perfect, said no one else had anything like it. But now she was secretly looking for something bigger, shinier, something more like what her friends probably had. I didn't bring it up right away. I tried to be fair. Maybe she was just curious. Maybe she got caught up in wedding fever. But deep down, I started to realize something was off. The Casey I fell for, the one who loved porch coffee and quiet mornings, who didn't care about brand names or glitz, was beginning to feel like a version of her that she played for me. It became more obvious as we moved further into wedding planning, starting with the bridesmaids. At first, Casey said she wanted her girls to pick their own dresses as long as they stayed within a certain color palette. I thought that was pretty thoughtful. Not everyone has cash to burn. But that idea didn't stick. One evening, she came home with a stack of bridal magazines and her phone pulled up to a Pinterest board loaded with designer gowns. Look at these, she said, excited, pushing the magazines toward me. I flipped through the glossy pages. Every dress had some fancy name attached to it. Vera Wang, Monique Louillier, you name it. These are nice, I said slowly. But they look pricey. Well, yeah, she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. They're Vera Wang. You can't go wrong with a classic. For you or for the bridesmaids? I asked, already feeling uneasy. For the bridesmaids, she said casually, like she was talking about picking napkin colors. Casey, those dresses are going to run hundreds of dollars each. Are you sure your friends can swing that? She shrugged like it wasn't her concern. They'll manage. It's just one day, and I want everything to match and look good. Plus, it's a dress they can totally wear again. I shook my head. Most people don't rewear bridesmaid dresses. It's not really practical. She rolled her eyes. Why do you always have to be so negative? It's my wedding. This is what I want. They'll understand. I didn't fight her on it, but it left me feeling uneasy. It wasn't just the cost, it was the attitude. She expected everyone to jump through hoops for her, no matter what it meant for them. Then came the bachelorette party. I figured she'd keep it simple, maybe a weekend in a cozy cabin or a night out in the city. But Casey had something flashier in mind. We're going to Scottsdale, she announced one night, practically glowing with excitement. Scottsdale, I said, blinking. Yeah, just a long weekend on the beach with my girls. It's going to be so fun. That sounds expensive, I said, trying to stay neutral. Well, yeah, she laughed. But it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. They'll get it. Have you talked to them about it? Not yet. she admitted. But I already booked the villa. I stared at her. Casey, what if some of them can't afford a trip like that? She just shrugged. Then I guess they're not real friends. If they really cared about me, they'd find a way to make it happen. That's what Casey said, and I just sat there, stunned. I couldn't believe those words came out of her mouth. This wasn't the woman I thought I was going to marry. The woman I fell for appreciated simple things, someone who loved that I lived a no-frills life and valued what truly mattered. But now, it felt like I was looking at someone entirely different. Someone who cared more about putting on a show than being present with the people who loved her. And believe me, it got worse. One evening, Casey sat me down at the kitchen table, her face serious. She said she'd had a talk with her parents about our wedding budget. Immediately, I felt a knot form in my stomach. I could tell this was going to go south. So, she started slowly. My parents think we should seriously think about taking out a loan. You know, to make sure we have the kind of wedding we really deserve. I just blinked at her for a second, like I hadn't heard right. A loan? For the wedding? I asked, already dreading the rest of this conversation. Yeah, she said, totally calm, like she was suggesting we grab takeout. It's not a big deal. We can pay it off afterward. It's just to make sure everything turns out perfect. Casey, we've already talked about this, I said, trying to stay even. I don't want to start our marriage drowning in debt. She gave a casual wave of her hand. Come on, it's not that serious. Everyone does it. No, they don't, I said, my voice firmer now. And even if they did, I'm not going to. I've worked hard to stay out of debt, and I'm not throwing that away for a party. That's when her whole demeanor changed. Her smile vanished, and she narrowed her eyes at me. You're being selfish, she snapped. This is supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, and you're treating it like it's some burden. I'm not being selfish, I replied, doing my best to stay calm. I'm being realistic. We don't need to go bankrupt to have a meaningful wedding. She folded her arms and glared at me like I just insulted her entire family. Maybe you don't care about having a beautiful wedding, but I do. And if you really loved me, you'd get that. That one hit me hard. I couldn't believe she was using that line. If you loved me, over something like taking out a loan for a wedding. I looked at her and said, Casey, this isn't about love. This is about being responsible. I'm not doing it. End of discussion. She didn't respond. She just stood up and walked out of the room without a word. We barely spoke for days after that. The tension between us was thick enough to cut with a knife. She was clearly furious, but I wasn't about to budge. I had laid out my boundaries, and I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me into blowing through them. Then she pulled the next move, getting my family involved. At dinner one night, my sister Molly pulled me aside. Hey, she said, a little hesitant. I talked to Casey earlier, and she mentioned you've been kind of stubborn about the wedding stuff. Stubborn? I repeated, already feeling my frustration rise. She just wants the day to be special, Molly said, trying to sound neutral. I mean, you know how important this is to her. Maybe you could try to meet her halfway. Molly, I said, my voice a little sharper now. She wants me to take out a loan to pay for a wedding. Molly's eyebrows went up. Well, yeah, but I mean, you'd pay it off eventually. That's not the point. I snapped. I'm not going into debt for a single day, no matter how meaningful it is. And if Casey can't understand that, then maybe we've got bigger issues. Molly didn't say much after that. But from the look on her face, it was clear she didn't agree. Casey had apparently painted me as the bad guy, someone refusing to compromise. And the worst part? I was starting to wonder if I even recognized the woman I'd asked to marry me. The Casey I thought I knew, the sweet, down-to-earth girl who laughed at tangled fishing lines and loved early mornings on my porch, was vanishing. And in her place was someone obsessed with appearances, with image, with status. Someone who seemed less and less interested in building a life with me, and more interested in curating a picture-perfect event around her. The wedding, I realized, wasn't about us anymore. It was about her, and what she wanted. And the more I stood firm, the more she seemed to resent me for it. At that point, I was already close to my limit. Things between us were tense, hanging by a thread. But what happened next? That broke the thread clean in two. Casey invited me over to her parents' house for dinner. Nothing unusual there. We'd had plenty of meals with them before. But this time, something felt off. The way she asked me, it was too sweet, too rehearsed. She said, it's just a casual dinner. My parents want to chat about the wedding stuff, nothing heavy. My gut told me otherwise. And sure enough, the second I walked through their front door, I knew something was up. Her mom and dad were already waiting in the living room, sitting a little too straight, with these plastered-on smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Then her dad, a guy who usually barely spoke to me, suddenly stood up and gave me this overly enthusiastic backslap. "There he is," he said cheerfully. "The man of the hour." I forced a polite smile, but I had no clue what I was walking into. Casey grabbed my arm and led me to the couch, sitting way closer than she normally did in front of her parents. That was my second red flag. Casey was never one for public displays of affection around her parents, so when she clung to my arm as we sat on their couch, I already knew something was off. Her mom came in with a tray of drinks, and we made awkward small talk for a bit. I figured maybe it was just wedding stress making everyone weird. But then her dad cleared his throat and leaned forward like he was about to get serious. "So," he said, locking eyes with me, "Casey mentioned you two have been clashing over the wedding budget." I glanced over at Casey. She gave me a stiff, nervous smile, one of those play-along looks. Yeah," I said slowly. "We've had some talks about the budget. I think we just see things a little differently when it comes to what we're comfortable spending." Her dad let out this dry laugh, not the kind that puts you at ease, but the kind people use when they're about to serve you some condescending wisdom. "Well, son, a wedding isn't just a celebration, it's an investment. A symbol of your commitment, wouldn't you say?" I took a breath. "I get that. But I don't think going into debt is the right way to show we're committed. I'd rather start our life with some financial stability." Her mom jumped in then, her voice sugary sweet and full of fake concern. "But sweetie, wouldn't it be worth it if it makes Casey happy? She's dreamed of this day since she was little. Don't you want to give her that?" My jaw tightened, but I stayed calm. Of course I want her to be happy. But I also believe we can have a meaningful, beautiful wedding without spending money we don't have. Her dad leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like he was waiting for a challenge. "So what I'm hearing is, you're not willing to step up for my daughter." That one stung, but I didn't let it show. "No, what I'm saying," I replied, keeping my voice steady, "is that I won't risk our financial future over one day. Casey and I talked about keeping things simple and real. That's what I thought we both wanted." Finally, Casey spoke. Her voice was soft, almost like she was trying to de-escalate. "Babe, it's not about the money. It's about creating memories, starting our life together with something we'll always remember." I turned to her. "I want that too. I really do. But we don't need to break the bank to make memories. We can have something special without going into debt." Her mom let out this dramatic sigh, like I was some clueless man who just didn't get it. "Oh, honey, sometimes men just don't understand. You're trying to create something magical, and that's hard for them to see." That was my breaking point. I stood up, feeling the weight of their judgment filling the room. "With all due respect," I said, looking at her parents directly, "this isn't about misunderstanding anything. It's about priorities. I've worked hard to build a solid life, and I'm not going to throw that away for something we don't need. If that's not enough, for Casey or for any of you, then maybe we all need to rethink what this wedding is even about." Her dad stood too, towering over me like he was trying to flex. "Rethink? What exactly are you saying, son?" "I'm saying," I replied, not backing down, "I'm not going to be guilt or bullied into something I don't believe in. I love Casey, but I'm not going to abandon my values for anyone." The room went dead silent. Her mom looked like someone had just slapped her. Her dad's face turned bright red. Casey looked completely stunned, like she couldn't believe what just came out of my mouth. "You're blowing this way out of proportion," she finally said, her voice trembling. "No, I'm not," I said, turning toward her. "This didn't just come out of nowhere. You've been pushing for things you know I can't afford. I've tried to meet you halfway, but it's never enough." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't budge. "If having your dream wedding matters more to you than the life we're supposed to be building together, then maybe we're not right for each other." "Casey, say something," her mom whispered sharply, but Casey just sat there, staring at me like she'd just realized who I really was. I grabbed my coat and walked toward the door. "I think we both need time to figure out what we actually want," I said without looking back. "I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk." The next day, I packed up the things she'd left at my place, some clothes, a couple of books, her toothbrush in the bathroom drawer, and texted her to come get them. She didn't respond right away. Later that night, I got a long message from her, telling me how hurt she was and that she couldn't believe I was just walking away. I didn't answer. This wasn't about walking away. It was about standing up for myself, for my future. I wasn't going to let guilt or pressure drag me into a version of life I didn't believe in. It wasn't easy, but it was the right call. I might have lost Casey, but I held on to my values and my peace of mind. And in the long run, that was worth way more than any wedding day fantasy. Over the following weeks, her true colors showed even more. Word got back to me through mutual friends that Casey was telling people I was cheap, that I wouldn't even pay for basic wedding stuff. Some of her friends reached out to me, asking if it was really true that I refused to support the wedding at all. I didn't go around trying to defend myself, but I told the truth when people asked. Anyone who actually knew me already understood I wasn't the villain in this story. But the kicker? Casey didn't stay single for long. I found out she was already seeing someone new, a guy named Trevor. Lawyer, flashy, known for throwing money around. According to one of my buddies, Casey had been bragging that Trevor was finally giving her the life she deserved. And then, karma stepped in. A couple of months after Casey and I split, I bumped into Jenna, her maid of honor and closest friend, at the grocery store. Jenna and I had always gotten along well, so it didn't surprise me when she stopped to say hi. What had catch me off guard was how quickly the conversation turned to Casey. So, she said with a sly smile, "You heard what's been going on with Casey and Trevor?" I raised an eyebrow. "Nope," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "What happened?" Jenna's grin got wider. Let's just say her perfect wedding didn't exactly work out the way she'd planned. Apparently, Casey had been putting just as much pressure, maybe even more, on Trevor as she had on me. She talked him into renting out a fancy venue, hiring a top-tier wedding planner, and, of course, upgrading her engagement ring to something with a big shiny diamond. But it didn't stop there. When she started pushing for an even bigger budget and throwing tantrums over tiny details, Trevor hit his breaking point. Jenna looked like she was trying not to laugh when she said, "He didn't just call off the wedding, he dumped her altogether." I won't lie, there was a moment of satisfaction in hearing that. I had tried to make Casey see that her priorities were out of balance, but she just wouldn't hear it. Now, someone else had learned the same lesson the hard way, and she was facing the fallout. Jenna leaned in a little, lowering her voice. She's been going around telling people he blindsided her, made promises he didn't keep, but between you and me, she torpedoed the whole thing herself. I thanked Jenna for the update, wished her well, and continued on with my shopping. And for the first time in weeks, I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. After that, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I ended up buying a small cabin just outside of town, exactly the kind of place I'd always dreamed of owning. It was peaceful, quiet, and all mine. No drama, no chaos. Just space to breathe and finally focus on what mattered to me. Every now and then, I'd hear bits and pieces about Casey through the grapevine. Word was, she was having a tough time finding someone willing to jump through all the hoops she set up. She'd gone on a handful of dates, but none of them lasted long. One of my friends joked that if Casey could marry her credit card, she probably would, as long as the credit limit was high enough. Looking back, I'm genuinely thankful for everything that happened. It wasn't easy. There were plenty of moments where I questioned myself, wondering if I should have just given in to keep the peace. But holding firm taught me something valuable. Real love doesn't demand you sacrifice your values or bury your boundaries. It's built on mutual respect, shared goals, and a willingness to meet each other halfway. Casey tried to guilt me, to push me, to mold me into someone I wasn't, and in doing that, she showed me exactly who she was. I'm grateful for that clarity. Sometimes, you have to go through hell to figure out what actually matters. For me, it meant walking away from a relationship that no longer felt honest, and choosing to prioritize my happiness, my future, and my peace of mind. It hurt in the moment, sure, but I don't regret a single step. Karma has a strange way of tying things up in the end. Watching Casey's carefully crafted world fall apart while mine quietly came together, that was all the closure I needed.